Today, I'll be talking about the Trail of Tears, mainly the removal of the Cherokee tribe. For those who have not heard of the Trail of Tears, it was when 5 different Indian tribes were forcibly removed from their homeland and relocated to Oklahoma. The trail they had to take was more than 1,000 miles away and is named the Trail of Tears because of its devastating effects. The true number of how many died, I could not find. Some stated 4,000, others stated 8,000. Of these, many are buried in unmarked graves along the trail. The Cherokee removal was the most infamous removal of the 5 groups of Indians removal, and that is the one I will focus on today. The discovery of the New World by Europeans causes endless problems for the American Indians who were here long before they arrived. The Cherokees' land once ran long and wide before the American Revolution, but after the American Revolution, Cherokee tribal land shrank considerably in the north and east as populations of whites settled increased. The colonizers' endless desire for land instigated a trend of continuous devastating change. The federal government attempted to bring Indians into mainstream American society began in earnest. In politics of Cherokee leadership, the eventual adoption of laws and a written constitution modeled on that of the United States proved to be innovations that ultimately transformed the socio-political structure of the Cherokee life. The Cherokee Phoenix paper was even born during this time. The Cherokee had lived in villages in the present-day Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Western North Carolina, and South Carolina, Northern Georgia, and Eastern Alabama. There, in a land of valleys, ridges, mountains, and streams, they developed a culture based on farming, hunting, and fishing. The Cherokee adopted some traditions of white society. However, they were not provided equal protection under law. No one could prevent whites from stealing their lands. During this time, the Cherokees were increasingly subjected to invasions of armed men from Georgia, forcibly seizing horses and cattle, taking possession of houses. According to Davis, southern states had decided to force the federal government hands due to bargain gone had. Back in 1802, the government had promised Georgia that they would purchase Indian land as soon as possible, and 28 years later, it's still not been done. Georgia expected that all titles to land held by Indians would become void when the state ceded its western lands in the federal coverage. Through state laws and by squatting on Cherokee lands, Georgia pressed for Cherokee removal. The situation grew worse in 1828 when the state of Georgia passed an act annexing Cherokee country, declaring Cherokee laws null and void. Subjected to pressure from the U.S. government for more land, the Cherokee resisted as best they could. According to Davis, he stated the decade of 1830 was a time of great loss for American Indians due to growing number of whites in Mississippi, Georgia, and Florida, and the passage of the Indians Removal Act, which shows that Georgia's plan worked. According to Smithers, the state of Georgia sought to speed up dividing the Cherokee people of their lands. The state passed a series of laws stripping them of their rights and incorporating Cherokee lands into state countries. Cherokee leaders resisted pressure to sign a removal treaty for years. But when the state of Georgia extended state law over them in 1828, President Jackson decided to deal only with this treaty party, and the Treaty of New Chota was signed December 1935. The treaty was signed by some individual Cherokees, but not by the principal officers of the nation, and called for an exchange of eastern land for lands west of the Mississippi River and Indian territory in payment of $15 million to the Cherokees. Despite a Cherokee majority opposed to this treaty, the eastern lands were sold for millions in exchange for the Cherokee agreement to move beyond the Mississippi River. According to Gaines, the only Cherokee not included from this relocation are members of the group, the Eastern Bank of the Cherokee. During 1819 treaty was exempt from removal. This group still resides there today. The leaders of Indian Nation stated the treaty is not valid, but to no avail. It was eventually consummated. The lengthy treaty spelled out the details of removal, but still left many questions unanswered. Lack of instructions, the obsession with thrift and economy, diseases, and exceptional harsh weather caused massive administrative difficulties and much human suffering. In 1838, U.S. Army began to implement a federal government policy to remove American Indians from their homelands in the southeastern states to make room for white settlements. Under the U.S. government's supervision, tens of thousands of these Indians trekked hundreds of miles through dangerous land, some during very hot summers or very cold winters, facing hunger and sickness. John G. Burnett, a soldier who participated in the removal, described the scene as followed. Men working in the field were arrested. Women were dragged from their homes. Children were often separated from their parents to be put in stockades. The Cherokee was driven from their homes over water and land routes to Indian territory about 2,200 miles away. Approximately 16,000 men, women, and children made the dreadful journey, one marked by adverse conditions and high rates of disease and mortality. This removal in the hottest part of the year was hard with so many sicknesses and mortality. One group missed their fall departure date, instead leaving in the depths of winter. Downpour rain damages roads and delayed progress. Lower river levels forces on steamboat to unload a party 90 miles before drop-off point. There they camped for a month, and during one of the coldest periods ever known in the country. Political pressure to remove the Indians quickly and cheaply had led to a poorly planned and executed operation in the winter of 1831 to 1832. Not that the War Dept would admit it, a War Department report to Congress in February 1832 at the suffering that plagued the winter of 1831 to 1932 and blamed it on the Indian savagery, but insisted that it had matters in hand. The removal resulted in indescribably human suffering. The original plan was to put them on steamboats and move them down the Tennessee and Ohio rivers to Mississippi. A few thousand were moved this way. At first, 3 groups of Cherokee made this long journey. The first one made it there safely. The next 2 were forced to stop due to drought and low water. Not well prepared for the delays, many of them suffered and perished from disease. Due to this horrible outcome, Chief Ross at the U.S. government to agree to let them conduct their own removal. The remaining Cherokees, in groups of about 13 with 1,000 people, traveled on existing roads, hoping for easier travels. Road conditions, illness, and early winter in 1838 made death a daily occurrence. Per Thornton, suffering and turmoil did not end in arrival in Indian territory. Many survived the hardships of imprisonment and traveled only to face disease and starvation in the new homelands. Three of the Cherokee men who had signed the treaty, Major Ridge, his son John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot, were executed. The men were killed in the law of the nation due to their treason, punishable with death. Thousands of Cherokees are said to have died during the entire Trail of Tears ordeal, which includes the roundup, months spent in stockades, the journey itself, and the first year in Indian Territory. There is not detailed information as to exactly how many Cherokees died during the removal period. Only speculations exist. Per demographer Thornton, he puts death at approximately 8,000 for the entire removal.